We're in an opportunity right now to be able to bring these things in their raw data, the lived experience of others, which is both qualitative and quantitative, and acknowledge it. It starts there. And for me, there's no dialogue unless we can start there. If we can't start there, honestly, you're my enemy. If you're not willing to at least come to the table with that understanding, honest enough with yourself and with that, we have not had that moment in our society.
Yes. And then to reconcile also means, from what I understand, to bring back together two things that were already to reconcile. They were already together at one point and then they become apart. And there are some people from the communities who feel like they were never together in the first place, and they can't even see, they won't accept that us being human. So here we are at this crossroads, it seems, and I'm still asking the question, okay, everybody, in these circumstances and situations, what do we really want?
Before we jump into today's episode, I want to thank those of you who have become proximity sponsors at Patreon. For $5 a month, you can make sure that this show continues to deliver top quality content as we seek to make an impact on our fractured perceptions and relationships. If you haven't done so yet, please take a moment to subscribe as a supporter on Patreon. You can also help us by sharing this podcast on social media and subscribing to our YouTube channel. You can find all of this at avipenhollow.com and on the Proximity Portal Facebook page. I'm Avi Penhollow, a teacher, writer, musician, clergyman, and a doctoral student in language and literacies for social transformation at the University of Missouri at Columbia. And I'm your host here along with Jason McNair on the Proximity Portal. In this episode, a calm and meditative Jason returns from vacation and reflects on what should be written into a new social contract. Are we advocating throwing out the U.S. Constitution? Now, this would certainly cause many people to panic. But is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness something that can be legislated? Are there new priorities to which we can evolve? Jason and I visit some of our sacred cows and blasphemous rumors in this conversation, which takes us into the realms of mystic pretensions of certainty, the relationship between apologizing and reconciliation, and we ask the question, is it even possible to move on without truly reckoning with our conflicted past? As always, we dive into the wellspring of multiple perspectives, positionality, and the power of language. Ultimately, we are seeking the essence of both cohesion and conflict by transcending the noisy discourse and prescriptions for symptoms over real conversations about how we got here in the first place. And with that, let us now ascend to the message.
All right, so here we are. I'm Avi Penhollow, and today I'm here with, as always, Jason McNair. How you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I'm in a good mood. I'm in a calm mood. I realize how important it is to grasp with words what mood I'm in, because I can rationalize better whether or not I need to be in that mood or not, you know? Mm-hmm. And so I'm in a good mood. I'm in a calm mood. I feel like I'm in a clear, I'm in a calm mood, which makes me feel clear, makes me feel settled. For someone like me who is sensitive to their moods and how that affects my emotions, I think it's good for me and others who are like me to be able to find the words, to describe their moods. The other night, Friday night, what's today? Today's Sunday. Friday night, I was in a great mood. I went out Friday with some old friends and reconnected with them. We went skating. That felt good. I wanted to stay there. I just wanted to stay there. When I was on vacation a couple of weeks ago, I was at the lake house at Smith Mountain Lake, Virginia. My family rents several different lake houses, and we actually just travel to one another's houses throughout the week. And we enjoy ourselves. We eat probably way too much, but it's good. That essence of being with family, And when people go on vacation, they want to, vacate. And typically when we talk about vacations, getting away, we're talking about getting away to something better to make us feel good. And from there, in the midst of all the transitions that we're going through as we're getting ready to write a new social, we have the idea through our prophetic imagination that we probably need to write a new social contract. And we've been discussing, what would go in that contract, how would we approach that. I come to one of the concluding thoughts that feeling good should probably be on that list.
Yes, and absolutely it should be on that list. I mean, if you boil down what it is that people are really looking for, they may not be doing it consciously, but it's really what people are looking for, what they want. People want their needs met. But in our culture, when I say culture, I just mean in the American sort of consumer mind set where we're constantly looking for satiation, right? To, to satisfy things. Satisfy these, like what we think we want, for example. Right. But I think what you're talking about is, happiness, and everyone sort of knows this on the surface. Everyone will say, money can't buy you happiness and that sort of thing, but we're all still chasing money, and so we know that money equals access and influence and affluence. It brings those things. So material comforts is one aspect of it, but everyone knows deep down that happiness is something else. And of course, it's not a new concept, because I want to mention this, that yes, what we're looking for on this show and in general, the question we're asking society, we're asking a few key questions. One of them I asked earlier this week is, what is something that you were once certain about that you've changed your mind about? And we got all kinds of interesting responses to that. I asked that question to provoke, because that's one of our jobs, is to provoke, for people to really think about, this process of change and transformation. And then really the pursuit of happiness is going to be, it has to be a pursuit. First of all, it doesn't just like, land on top of you. And there are ways that you can gauge your happiness and that sort of thing. But when we talk about a new social contract, that could cause some fear in the minds of several people who say, look at the US Constitution as the sacred document, never changing, and the whole like litmus test of, even being accepted in society would be your adherence and belief that this is the primary, ultimate text for contextualizing our social cohesion would be the US Constitution. It's almost, it's like right up there with the Bible. Right. And so when we are talking about writing a new social contract, it could be taken in the sense of, say, a political revolution where, no, we don't think that the US Constitution can even encompass this trajectory we want to go on to for this collective pursuit of happiness. That's not necessarily what I'm saying here, but what I am saying is we do need something that transcends this document that's frozen in time, written by a very specific demographic, by and for the people. Well, that meaning has had to change over time as we've, diversified reluctantly. And we're still in the process of that, of course. What I'm talking about really echoes some of the words that come from the Constitution. For example, like, what is it that we want? Well, the collective cry at that time from that certain demographic was life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And now, of course, we're talking in that same document, it refers, to slaves as being less than human. So clearly, all men created equal was not the intended. It wasn't intended for all men at that time. An interesting connection to that before we move into this conversation, I think would be, there was that phrase, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, was not created at that time. It was a carryover from an earlier statement, which would have been life, liberty, and property.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting to me that they would have changed it from property to the pursuit of happiness. We could go on for days about what that means. So bringing us back full circle to how you opened us up today, in this pursuit of happiness, people have to be able to define what it is that we're really looking for. So when we're talking about things on the macro level, like societal change, deconstruction of old paradigms or old structures and systems, we're often very good at the critical aspect, but we're not so good at thinking about what's going to replace it.
Yeah.
What do we want, essentially?
Yes. I think it's always good for us to arrive at new conclusions as we evolve. I think it's natural for us to arrive at new conclusions as we evolve. I think that we have proven to ourselves that we think that conclusions are authoritative by nature. And then we want to capture those conclusions and we want to put them down on paper and on documents and say, okay, this is law. Why? Because we've analyzed our situation and we've come to this conclusion, and therefore this is the response to the conclusion that we've come to, and this is the authority.
And you circumscribe your entire life around that set, and you
whether
carry
it's
it
the
with
Bible, you. Whether it's the Constitution, it can be your marriage vows, and a lot of times what happens is, from my experience, we get to these blocks in the road that ask us to come to new conclusions based on the experiences that we've now had. You talked about earlier, you said we were having a conversation before the podcast started. You said it's very hard for someone we're talking about language. It's very hard for someone who doesn't have the same experience to reach the same conclusions. And so for those of us if we don't have the shared experience, then how can we come to some concise, and here's the thing, there we go. A lot of times we want these conclusions to be portable so that we can carry them around and commit them to memory easily. But if we have no link of continuity or no harmonious interaction going on based upon the fact that we come from different experiences, then that's going to cause us to have to think more about these conclusions that we're coming to, because they have to be very nuanced, because they have to take into account the various levels of perspectives based on the various experiences. So we can't just say we're going to write a new social contract and point number one, boom, this is the conclusion, and have it be extremely broad, because then based upon our experiences, we're going to break it down and say, well, what about, start asking questions. It's only natural. So what does that mean? How can we ever draw some very powerful or come to some very powerful conclusions that are the best for all of us?
Yeah. And then the fancy word for one of the fancy domains for that would be the field of phenomenology, right? And one of the aspects of phenomenology is to examine the experiences, the lived experiences of people and perspectives, right? Mm-hmm. And the whole task then is to try to boil it down to find an essence behind those experiences, those diverse experiences, to find some sort of shared or universal themes out of it. That would be one of the tasks in phenomenology, to try to examine the phenomenon of experience, lived experience, and then to draw from that some of these. So for me, given that that's part of my personal.
How long would that take to do that? How long would you suppose it would take to? I mean, how would you control that's a lot of good questions.
Well, I I think like any research, you wouldn't be able to do it in sort of necessarily in an ontological way, in the sense of, or I guess you wouldn't do it in a way in which you're trying to find the answer to everything. So you would pick a certain aspect of that conversation of, well, let's pick an experience. So in my case, education.
Right.
What was your experience with, say, literacy instruction growing up? And I interview, several people, a sample of people on that from different backgrounds and demographics and economic status, and maybe even different languages and stuff like that. And then you hear these stories and you start to look for patterns to emerge,
right,
in those narratives. And through that, you're able to extract some sort of commonalities when it comes to that. So I think it's not necessarily trying to boil down the answer to everything. It's realizing that you have to at least formulate a question based on a need or a problem or something like that. And then find out what people are saying. So one of the lead questions I have in proximity, because the idea is to bring people together, and to bring ideas together and to find these commonalities, would be, well, let me go out and find a diverse, differences of opinion, people all over the spectrum, politically, whatever, religiously, culturally. Just ask them a simple question like, let's talk about learning to read. As an educator, that would be one aspect, and what were your experiences with literacy growing up?
Right.
And then from that, I could get all kinds of different perspectives.
Yeah. From very simple questions you can get, and that's given that the people who are answering them feel safe and comfortable with being honest.
And that's a whole other domain.
Like the question you asked on Facebook the other day, you said, evoke it here. You said, what is something that you held as absolute truth, or you can say it better than I. What was the question you asked?
It was something along the line of, what is something that you were certain of that you believed in before? Or what is something that you were once certain of that you no longer believe
to be true?
Right.
Like at one point you thought it was absolute truth, and now through experiences you come to find that this is not necessarily the truth.
Right.
And so I wonder, there's so many different things that people can think about when they hear that question. And then my thing was, because there's some things I wanted to say, but I was too afraid to be honest.
Oh, you mean publicly?
Publicly honest. Yeah, publicly, because, and that's the thing though, but I can be honest with myself. Absolutely. Yeah. But,
well, it's hard to be honest publicly, on things.
It's hard I guess it is hard to be honest publicly because, especially in this day and time,
But here it is. But people are very free to share their political views and these other, sort of certainties that they have.
Right.
But that's what I found to be interesting, so on social media, for example, that post by itself elicited more response than the last 100 posts that I put out there. So what I'm learning and what I'm finding is that when you ask a question like that, just ask the question. I didn't say what I thought about it. I didn't say what mine was.
Right.
People are willing to respond. And what does that tell me as a person is that people do want to think about it. Now, how many people shared versus not sharing who wanted to?
Yeah.
Number one. Number two, how many of the people that shared, and I'm sorry for those of you who are listening who may have shared on that post, but how many people who shared on that post shared their first thought?
Yeah.
Or was it their second or third thought for public consumption?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's one of the things that I was thinking about as I was reading, and a lot of people were sharing their religious perspectives and other things. And so
it's important. It's important because all of these things, as you say, are important for knowing the truth, and there are many ways of knowing, and we'll go into those on the show. But when it comes to like what some people perceive of as if there is an objective reality, right? Establishing truth claims does require a certain discipline, regardless of the modality that you're using. There are different ways of doing research, but the concerns are kind of the same. For example, we just talked about one. What is the reliability of the sample, say, of asking a question like that?
Yep.
What are the factors that might influence the safety of a person feeling safe to share,
Yes.
or an honesty to share, or preconditioned responses? I can't tell you how many surveys I've sent out as a teacher,
Right.
and even with giving the direction to the students, hey, I want you guys to be honest here. Do not worry. Don't even put your name on it. I care more about the truthfulness of something than giving me the right answer as a teacher. But even with that, I considered my classroom to be a pretty safe environment, to voice your opinion. I would still get the majority of responses. I could hear in their response that they were writing for the teacher's gaze.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what do we want? We want to feel good. We want to feel approval. We want to feel, that's why they're writing for the teacher's gaze.
Yeah.
They want to pass the class.
They want to pass the class.
They want to pass the class. They want someone to say, you know what? They want the teacher to go, I read a really good response. Here's the response that someone wrote when I asked this question. I see you didn't have to put your name on it. And I thought this was real. Whoever wrote this was absolutely, and they're like, oh, that was me, Mr. Penhollow.
I'll own that now. Right. Right. And of course, that's true for all of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I
feel the same way, even at the doctoral level, and I'm thinking, I've had a window open on my computer for 2 days. I have to answer a question about what is my research interests, right? Which I have a ton of them. But, what research methodology do I think best fits with, my dissertation topic and that kind of thing. And so it's that process of me going inside and going, what is it that I really want out of this?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the answer that comes out is more of, how do I want them to hear it and perceive it? And how do you want to be perceived? You don't want someone to say, read your stuff and say, this guy's an idiot. Right.
Or you may not care, and even if you might not care, it still doesn't feel good to have someone, conflicting opinions concerning, and that's a part of life,
Well, I think to answer your question from earlier, I think it's related, that one of the things that we want is, of course, belonging.
Belonging, affirmation.
Right. Affirmation, I think, is even a better word. Yeah.
Why do you think that word's better than belonging?
Because belonging and affirmation are kind of the same to me, in the sense of, well, there's a downside, of course, to belonging. When it means conformity, because that affirmation is going to be coming through conformity. But some people, that's what they want, and they're willing to sacrifice their own personal sovereignty or individual will, or even their desires and hopes, because it's more comforting to have affirmation that you belong. And even people who struggle against that still, in a sense, show that there's a wound there of not belonging when they say, I don't care, I don't want to belong.
Acceptance.
Right. And of course, I was in the punk movement for a while when I was younger, and that's all about negation.
Yeah. You create a whole nother crew of people who accept each other for being the rejected, I guess.
Sure, and subcultures are extremely judgmental about those who are not fitting the protocols of their subcultures. So on and on it goes.
So we want to belong, like everyone. We want to feel accepted. Everyone wants to feel like they're a part. Everyone. I think by the nature of the cells in our body that agree with one another, to, like, for example, the white blood cells, to get out to fight against bacteria and disease and things of that sort. There's not one single blood cell that's doing a particular action. It's a collective group of them that are doing a particular action, and they're all doing the right things. Like, all the fingers are moving, all the toes are moving, all the arm, it's a whole body, right? So I think It's
Yeah,
natural
you
for
want to
us
just
to
take
want to
it.
belong.
Yeah, if you want to just take the human body, you know, and then of course in the biblical literature, St. Paul uses the body narrative, and
Right.
you know, can the hand say to the eye, "I don't need of you," and or that kind of thing. That's one way to look at it, but you are going at it deeper than that when you talk about blood cells and that sort of thing. Well, the blood cell's job in that sense, you know, is to make sure you don't get in or whatever. You know, it's like there's different
to fight off invaders and
some aspects of this complicated being that make up ourselves, including the things that we're hosting in our living organism that are us and are not us at the same time. Microorganisms, bacteria in our belly, you know, all those things, they have specific functions. And I don't know if I want to ask the bacteria in my stomach to you know, do the purpose of my cognitive reasoning or something like that. You know, it's like, so I need certain aspects of my material body to just do their job.
Right.
You know, without demeaning them, but just do your job. And I'm not going to sit and overthink, you know, what my blood cells are doing at this given moment. However, I can also, though, tune into that aspect and be grateful towards these things that I know are happening, these living communities inside my body, performing their functions and that sort of thing. And so there's a place for everything.
Oh, now that conclusion that you just arrived at, I think that in order for us to write a new social contract, to come to it, we have to come to a new understanding. And what you just said is probably one of those more enlightened understandings, that everything has its place, that it's almost like this, the yin, I see the yin yang symbol, actually, with all the white and a little bit of dark in the white, and
I'm
all
laughing.
the black and a little bit of white in the dark, you know?
Oh, I know.
And
I'm laughing because I had a very similar conversation with someone else, and this you're using the same image. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You know, and so it's like, you know, we got to ride this wave of Trump. I knew this from the very beginning when he first got to the office. I've always felt this way. And I felt to myself, I said, you know what? He may be when he first got elected, everything was going on, it was horrible. And I said, he may be the last president that we have to experience like this, though. You know, maybe we got to let this happen.
You mean
like the last time we'll ever see this, because, and it's the same thing like what we talked about last week with regards to all the females that are now coming into places of power, which let me just put in here, I'm absolutely comfortable with that. But the reason why is because for so long there's been the patriarchy and, you know, and that masculine energy that's been front loaded or lopsided. And so now we're bringing back into balance, and it's only natural for these things to ebb and flow in and out like the breath.
There's no way we can even do
out.
any of this. We can't even have the discussion about what is it that we want and to move to another social contract. And if we do not reflect the actual society that we live in right now, we live in a system that's very limited in what it reflects. And it reflects, you know, pretty much the dominant culture values. So we can't even, we are very sick and out of balance. And so, you know, the first steps in that, of course, is opening it up and acknowledging, you know, our deficiencies. And a lot of people are very uncomfortable with even admitting there's deficiencies. There's this hyper defensiveness when it comes to American exceptionalism and that sort of thing. And I call that empire exceptionalism. And there's actually nothing exceptional about empire. This has been done historically over and over and over again. And if one thing empires have taught us is that there is no permanence in empire. Empires run their course. And if, you know, there are people with political agendas that will look at these examples from history only to support and cherry pick from the past to, you know, what is going to succeed or fail, or what they want to succeed or fail according to their political agendas. What I'm addressing is something a little more fundamental to that. And this goes back to some of our talks about Walter Brueggemann and the prophetic, which, and don't let me sidetrack where you were going with that. I just wanted to say that until there is a true, honest reckoning, a real reckoning, a real forgiveness, a real acknowledging of reality. There is no moving on. And the problem is that we have a large section of society that wants to, quote unquote, move on their own terms. They want to move on and forget, not necessarily forget, because even the people who want to move on without doing the hard work of reconciliation and healing, they want to do so at their own convenience. Mm-hmm. Instead of really acknowledging the pain and again, going back to the phenomenology of it all, the lived experience of people. And this is the problem I have. I'm sorry, I got to harp on this for just a second.
Go ahead.
But the problem I have with quote unquote white people who are hyper defensive when it comes to acknowledging things in the past, the problem I have with that, with this hypersensitivity is, number one, it's not honest. Number two, it's sweeping positionality under the rug as if it never existed. But even they will acknowledge, yes, those things were terrible and bad, but that was then and this is now. What I'm proposing that they add to their consciousness would be, where was the point of time where there was really in Hawaii, I don't want to use cultural references that are not our own, but in Hawaii, there's this concept called ho'oponopono, which is a way in that culture, reconciliation happened between two individuals or parties of people. And to boil it down, I'll have some Hawaiian experts come on here and, articulate it better than I'm going to right now. But the whole concept is that in order to do that, the parties have to be able to deliver the raw data. They have to be able to say what's really on their mind without any fear of the repercussions. And that part has not happened in this whole equation. You've had certain individuals, for example, apologize. You've had certain institutions apologize, but the majority of what has gone on is acting like, oh yeah, we've been there, we're enlightened, we've moved past that. When in fact, the passing of civil rights legislation, for example, that is very different from reconciliation. That's a legislative necessity, but that is different from the soul level societal healing that has to happen, that I don't think has happened yet. So I'm not willing to say, well, we just got to move forward. I would say this is an opportunity. We're in an opportunity right now to be able to bring these things in their raw data, the lived experience of others, which is both qualitative and quantitative, and acknowledge it. It starts there. And for me, there's no dialogue unless we can start there. If we can't start there, honestly, you're my enemy. And that's what some people would say. You would say, I'm not a racist is not a good answer. I'm an anti-racist. Fine. I am an anti-racist then, according to that definition. The definition of, if you're not willing to at least come to the table with that understanding and be honest enough with yourself and with that we have not had that moment in our society, then no, I'm not interested in, actually, I'm not interested in what somebody has to say. If their only agenda at being at the table is to deflect and say, well, that wasn't me. It's not my generation.
Let me ask you, we talked about reconciliation and apologies, and that they're two different things, of course.
Yep.
Do apologies make you feel better?
Well, the only way to answer that question, I guess, is to think about times we've apologized. So I'm thinking about the last time I apologized.
Oh, I mean, does someone apologizing to you for a wrong that they've done make you feel better? I'm going to leap into a question here.
Very good.
I'm going somewhere with regards to justice. Just follow me here. So I'm asking you, do apologies make you, like somebody comes and does something, right?
If somebody comes and apologizes,
depends on what it is. Does it depend on what it is?
Depends on what it is. It depends on the circumstances in which the apology is issued, under the conditions that it was issued. Because if it was issued because so-and-so's mom forced them to come and apologize for, hitting me with a rock as a kid, and you could tell that they don't want to apologize in the first place,
right.
then no, of course not,
But okay, so then apologizing won't always work, I guess, in
Right.
all instances.
Right.
Okay, then the second thing is, what is reconciliation?
Well, apology and reconciliation they're two related, but not the same thing to me at all.
Right.
Somebody can apologize to you, but and also to, certain level, but if I were to think of, let's put it personal, my father apologized to me for things that can never be taken back. You don't get back, and now we're going into the restoration thing. I had some real issues with my father growing up, and issues that he was not able. So this will be an interesting psychological analysis of what I just said compared to what I'm about to say now. He was never able to apologize, right? For what he did. Fast forward 2 years later, I'm in college. My dad is now pretty much an old man, and I've moved on in many ways. And so the relationship was pretty much once a year, maybe you'd see each other for a few minutes. I was reading some novels as part of a class, and it made me think about my family dynamics and how it's not going to help me to hate my father for the rest of my life. And so I decided, you know what? I don't think this person has the capacity to truly repent. Like, doesn't have it in them to deal with the horror of what that person had done.
Yes.
And so now the choice is left with me. If I'm going to maintain a relationship with that person, I either just worry about my own safety and negotiate the relationship that way, not putting up with any more, keeping myself out of the way, so to speak. But if I'm in here, how am I going to negotiate that relationship?
Right.
The other way I could go, and the way I chose was this other way. And the other way was realizing this person is limited in their ability to even acknowledge the pain and or what has been done, the harm.
Right.
So as a person, I want to be bigger than that. And so let me treat this human being as I would any other person who I don't know at that age, knowing where they're coming from culturally, their worldview and that kind of thing, and see how that goes. And so I went to dinner, with my dad with that understanding. And it was one of the best conversations we ever had. I didn't bring up the past. I let him know a few of the things that were going on in my life that he would never be privy to, things that he would never understand even. And that changed the relationship between myself and my father. He didn't apologize.
Say you reconciled?
I've reconciled with the possibility. I gave up on the possibility of him being able to acknowledge the truth. And just decided, but I wasn't no longer going to be defined by waiting for that answer.
You know where I'm going with this, right? Because there's a bunch of black people in the country who feel the same way you did about your dad.
Exactly. Right.
So there's no hope. There's nothing. There's a segment of people in our society who are just like you at that table with your dad, who say, there's nothing that can be done. There's nothing that can be said. And then I was also thinking about, so that's the apology part. Like, there's no apology you can give me that's going to make me feel better, because it's so important how we feel.
And I will never escape the consequences of those actions and the relationship.
Yes. And then to reconcile also means, from what I understand, to bring back together two things that were already to reconcile. They were already together at one point, and then they become apart. And there are some people from the communities who feel like they were never together in the first place, and they can't even see, they won't accept that us being human is the connection of oneness, is the point of connection. being a human being. It's not enough for them because there are too many other variances and differences, that make me not be able to identify with you on that level. And so here we are at this crossroads, it seems, and I'm still asking the question, okay, everybody, in these circumstances and situations, what do we really want? Given all, because there's a story upon a story upon a story that you gave the one with your father. I can give the one with my father. We can talk about, you talked about the cells in the body and they have to do their functions, and some things you want to keep out. You don't want to intermingle. You want them to fight off the bacteria. You want them to fight off the disease, the blood cells, that is. You want to keep them out because everything has to stay in a perfect harmony and a perfect balance, right? I think what I would like is I want a peace that surpasses understanding, but I also want an understanding that brings about peace. And I would want everyone to have that. And so therefore, when what appears to be catastrophe happens, it's not necessarily that we're disassociating or not attaching ourselves to the reality, but it's more so I've come to understand the ebbs and flows of life on a certain plane that allows me to accept the good with the bad. You see what I'm saying?
Oh, I do.
And when you're flying on that level, then you could be misunderstood. You could be considered cold by those who you don't feel the same. You don't share the same perspective. You could be considered cold by those with whom you don't share the same perspective, and you can be considered warm to those with whom you do share the same perspective or don't. It's so varied based upon perspective. I study astrology. I see there's 12 zodiac signs that are around the wheel. There's 10 planetary bodies, and they can be in any number of positions in any number of astrological houses, and no one chart is like any other chart, and they aspect each other from different angles and different perspectives, which yield different results. And one thing that I've come to as a conclusion is that we are all so complex, even the individual, so uniquely complex, that when you find a moment that you can harmonize with somebody, you just revel in that moment and take a breath and draw and exchange an energy from that person. And you want to try to exchange on a higher level, based upon the experiences that we've lived. But that couple that I went out with Friday, we had an energy exchange. And there was a point in time where my wife and I were in a certain position that they weren't in. And then we had to leave from that position. And then they didn't understand why we had to leave. And then they were put in that exact same position. And after they were put in that position, then they come back to us and we come back together and we reconciled. And we're able to speak on a higher level now because we've been in each other's shoes and we can exchange, But that's
all right.
us. That's unique. Sorry. Yes.
No. Because this is the word that's going through my head might not even seem relevant to this discussion, but it's death.
Yeah. Bring that in then. Yeah.
Okay. So death is, so now I'll flip back to my story with my dad, because so in that first sitting, I had already experienced a death. What I put to death was that how I feel was going to be determined by his response or lack of response, right? And so when I let that die, meaning I said to myself, this may never, ever happen. It may never happen that this person acknowledges, the consequences of his actions. And it seems, I want to be careful here because there's a difference between my personal situation and the larger social constructs that are in place. But there is some relationship here. And that would be, once I put that to death, there was a newness that came. There was a new opportunity, even for him, whether he realized it or not, that I wasn't hanging on to it. But intuitively, on a heart level, he sensed it. And so for the last few, because he died not shortly after, but a few years later. And in that time span, I saw him more in those last few years of his life than I had since I was 10 years old. You know, so this is in my 40s, right?
Wow.
And I bring that up because so he even came and stayed with me for a while, and he got to glimpse a little bit of my life, which he had never done before. Now, years later, I got a phone call from one of my relatives, said that my dad was very sick and that he needed to be transported from North Carolina all the way up to Iowa.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, I'll do it. And so I went to pick him up, and my dad wasn't completely coherent. He was suffering mentally pretty badly, knew he was ill. So I had to drive him in his little minivan all the way from North Carolina to Iowa with his illegal guns and all that stuff. I'm like trying to convince him, you know, Dad, we don't need the guns. We got to have the guns. I'm like, Dad, you know, I know those aren't registered. Can we just leave, you know?
Right.
But my dad was so afflicted at that time. I remember getting in the car with him, which took a long time to finally get him in the car. This is a bad idea. And I said, you know, we're not going to get to the end of the driveway. They're going to get us. Who's going to get us, Dad? You know, like, nobody's going to get us. We get to the end of the driveway. Well, you're not going to get to the end of the block. They're going to stop us. And I'm like, okay, well, Dad, we'll find out. You know, we get to the end of the block. We're at the end of the block. Well, we're not going to get to the county line. And you know, so like the boundaries kept expanding. Right. You know, and then we're moving, and well, we're not going to get to the state line. And it just went on and on like this. While we were going, though, my dad started crying and, you know, saying, I'm sorry, you know. And when I would say for what, of course, he still couldn't bring himself to say it, right? And I said, Dad, that's not why I'm here. You know, you don't have to apologize for anything.
Wow.
You know, like, you know, because death had come. And at this point, you know, the death had come. So we're laying in the hotel room, you know, on this journey to Iowa, you know, and he wakes up in the middle of the night crying and screaming out, you know, I'm sorry, and all that. But I didn't need to hear that.
Because you were able to come to this level of saying, I may never get that apology, and I've made my peace with it because I've let this certain aspect die. Then when physical death comes close to your father, now you're getting the apology.
After I already let it go.
After you already let it go.
But when you think about a breakthrough that is unlikely, instead of calling it a miracle, you know, that's a breakthrough that's unlikely. That is something that was hoped for and demanded to a certain extent. But when I saw Pharaoh, right, looked at the situation, when I'm making a biblical reference to the one with ears that cannot hear, the one with the hardened heart, the one that will not move for justice, will not move with compassion, for whatever reason. And in the end, the person who's suffering under that, why they don't need to care about what the reason is. It is not the job of the oppressed to sit and like worry about what the poor oppressor has gone through to be doing the oppressing. You know, there are different levels to this game. All I'm saying is that my own happiness to be determined based on a predetermined idea of what is a family, for example, like what is a father. You know, if we're looking for that, then we will not find happiness in our life. But you're a father. Now I'm a father, right? And I can't define my role or my aspirations as a father to be bound up in what I don't want to be. Those can inform my decisions, but if that's all I have, you're doomed to repeat those same things. So that carries over into issues of social justice. It carries over into issues of individual, you know, justice and achieving what we want. Even if my dad had never apologized to me,
You got to say that one again. You got to say that again. You say, I don't want to break your flow, but you talked about serving your best interest. That right there is a key thing that many people could, or I have experienced them as considering, oh, that's selfish, right? But it's like, no.
What I need is not going to be determined on something I have to take from you. This is what I need. What you do now, if you're standing my way, then you're going to have to move.
That's good.
Right.
That's
I'm not
really
going to walk
good.
around you if I don't see a way to walk around you. Somebody had said this the other day, then there's going to be a conflict and that's fine. But at the same time, if I don't have to walk through you, I won't. I'll step aside and keep walking. But even if I didn't get that apology that I was looking for, now that I'm not looking for it, there's an empowerment there that I am going to take care of my own. And if you look at any community that's been marginalized or oppressed, that's what has to be done. When you have a dominant culture, if you don't pull together and look out for your own, regardless of what anyone thinks about it, because there's a danger in looking out for your own and saying, no, actually, I don't want your culture. And you know what? I in a perfect world, I shouldn't have to conform to your culture.
Right.
But you're going to respect mine.
Yeah.
That's how I would see it when I look at it from the social aspect of it. It's like, as long as I'm not trying to take from you.
Right.
Then, and
as long as I'm not trying to take from you in a way that causes you displeasure. What about that? Because the thing about it is, because if I cause you displeasure, some people may hurt, some people may suffer, some people may be hurt, suffer, but then some people may get angry, some people may get mad, and then some people may retaliate, and now we're at war.
Well, I think that's where we're at now.
Yeah.
I mean, I think going back to our friend, in the White House is symptomatic. Not the cause of these things.
Right.
This is like, this is like the pimple coming to a head, like, it's like, and I don't think just popping it is going to be the solution,
We have to evolve. There's a lot that has to go on a micro level, but we also for the sake of not sounding like an escapist, it's like we also got to be able to find ways to, because we can't keep the cycle. We can't keep our mind on the negative. How can I say this? How people say, how some people say, I'm just being real, and then the real is always real negative. It's like we see it for what it is, but we also have to, my aspect here in this show is to say we have to see it for what it is, but also we have to see it on a higher level as well and say, hey, some of these struggles are a part of the ebb and flow of where we exist right now. Wise
as serpents, harmless as doves, all these kind of things,
Yes.
It's like, don't get me wrong. I'm not playing with you, Don't get me wrong. We will walk through you if we have to.
Yeah.
And as for displeasure, no, I mean, there's a certain part of me that's saying, no, I shouldn't care at all. If it displeases, of course it displeases you that you don't want to give up your seat. You don't want to share power, or you don't want to share this space, but it
upsets me too when you got your thumb on my neck, foot on my neck.
That was exactly what I was. Yeah. And so,
on my neck. Yeah.
So when you weigh the situation, whose displeasure are we really worried about?
But I'd rather exchange pleasure, because every time I've had an experience, of an exchange of pleasure, I've enjoyed it. Even this one right now that we're having.
Exactly. So, don't ever mistake what I'm saying as escapism or trying to avoid conflict, because I'm ready for conflict. We got to have it. Let's have it. That's fine.
Right.
Sometimes it's the most honest thing to do.
Yeah.
So there's this narrative going on with the left or whatever, being this weak passivity or just using language. No. By any means necessary.
Yeah.
Is it necessary? The question has to be asked, right?
Yeah.
Is this necessary right now? And if it isn't, and this is what I would say to everyone who's being active right now. And when I say that, I'm not just talking about like protesters, rioters, or counter protesters and counter rioters. I'm saying, is it necessary? Those are the questions I want you to ask yourself. It's not up to me to determine that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not out here to judge what anybody's doing necessarily on that level when you're dealing with this, with this volatile situation. What I'm doing is looking at the situation itself, and I'm saying, what's really going on here? And there are very displeased people who do not want things to change. And there's a whole generation of people right now, call them entitled if you want, but this generation is saying, we looked at what our parents got from being, compliant and that sort of thing. And we're not willing to do that. Are they all like at a maturity level that, you can sit and rationalize with and that sort? No, not everybody is, but neither is, look at the maturity level of the dominant culture who can't even sit down say, this happened.
Oh man,
something needs to be done about it. And then we can move forward to quote unquote, make America great. But they can't even get to that. So who's really the immature one? And so I'm not going to sit and blame some millennials who want to go burn a building or something like that. That's the least of my concern right now. And that may seem insensitive and make people all over pissed off about, decency and all that kind of thing. Look, we're looking at an entire system that's indecent and unjust. I am not going to say like that the destruction of a particular piece of property is of more value than the larger causation of why we're here. Actually, to go back to the positive side. So I have conversations with people who normally, and I'm working on myself, I would probably have unfriended or gotten rid of, but I intentionally drew a couple of these people closer. And whenever they walk down that path of like repeating the same old crap, I'll ask a question about their life. I'll ask a question about pleasure. What is it that makes you happy? Because you're so angry about all this other stuff. You know what I mean? What is it that you want, man?
Yep.
Well, I'm working my ass off and these people are collecting $600 extra a month. All right, that's fine. Does it hurt you that much? How much does it hurt you really? Like,
And they still didn't answer the question of what they wanted.
Yeah,
They just complained.
What do you want?
Sometimes you can be so much into that place of displeasure that you can't even really articulate what it is that you do want because you've been so hyper focused on what you don't want for so long.
And man, say that one more time, because that was it.
Like you've become so intimate with pain that you can't express in words pleasure. You can't express what it is. And if you can't express what it is, then you can't begin to experience it on a higher level. I learned that in my 10 years of marriage with my wife. Now that I've been married for 10 years, not to be too whatever, but hey, we please each other. I'm going on a higher level, but nothing in us physically changed. Nothing we're doing changed. It's a consciousness that changed. It's having 3 children. It's paying bills. It's building a life together. And so intimacy is taken on so much more. Now, if I focus so much on the displeasurable aspects of my life with her, and then I'd be complaining and nagging and we'd be fussing and arguing with one another. But if we choose to focus on, enjoying one another, and I find ways to examine myself and say, what is it really that I'm experiencing right now on this level of pleasure? And I find ways to articulate it, and I share that with her. Man, it opens up new portals, new pathways of understanding, of consciousness, because I'm able to express on a higher level. What I was saying was that if you focus so much on the displeasurable aspects, you'll get to a point where you can't even articulate pleasure.
So I don't want anybody listening to feel bad because you don't know what you want. Or
nope. It's one of the hardest questions to answer.
Absolutely. And sometimes people will answer this question with a prefabricated answer of what they perceive happiness to be. And it usually has to do with something that they haven't actually experienced yet, but what they think would make them happy, for example.
Right.
Or if I didn't have these problems, or if I didn't have this particular problem, this financial problem, or whatever, you know. And there's a certain level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs to where, listen, I'm not going to be thinking about that self-actualization stuff when I don't even know what I'm going to eat, you know, and my kids got to eat, that kind of thing, you know, like, so don't go talking to me about moral and ethics and sending to the message and all that stuff.
Right.
Like,
Much
you know,
more surface.
Yeah.
I need some food. I want to eat.
Like,
how about that?
Easy for you guys to say, you know, well, don't think about the things that displease you. Well, my stomach's empty. I'm sorry. You know,
I can't even begin to think about anything else except for the
you can't learn if you're hungry. You can't learn if you're starving or suffering, or you don't know if the lights are going to be on when you come home. You can't learn when you're trying to navigate, like, just coming to school, for example, is like a survival, you know. You can't learn. And if we know this to be true about kids coming to school, and we still don't do enough about it, all teachers know this. We all have a drawer full of like food and snacks and stuff like that. You got to, because what are you going to try to tell this kid who's got a stomach that's not, you know, that's grumbling, that they're supposed to sit and care about whatever content you're trying to deliver? We're all on somewhere on that pyramid. It is true. We've got to take care of basic needs before we can progress to the other needs. Or, you know, we have healthcare, or we have, you know, the basic needs in the most affluent society that has ever been.
And because we can't reach some of those basic needs, that's why if I were an alien looking down on the human race, I'd say,
what's wrong with those creatures?
They're so underdeveloped. They haven't even gotten the basic needs down yet.
Right.
Like, what is it going to take for them to say, hey, wait a minute, we all want to feel good. Let's just solve this. What would it take on the most basic level? Food. Okay, because we want to be able to be conscious enough and not starving. So let's just, to even experience pleasure, we all want to be conscious enough to be able to enjoy the life on its very basic level. So let's deal with hunger. I mean, oh my goodness. And it's maybe I sound like a
no, because there's an evil, in my view, I'll call it evil, on the other side of this, where it would say, you know, it's a mindset of scarcity, right? That causes a lot of these afflictions, the mindset of scarcity. Well, if you ask a capitalist what that means, it means, well, you haven't developed the tools to properly navigate in this economy in which to succeed, and therefore you have a mindset of scarcity. That's not what I'm talking about. Mindset of scarcity, when you look at it objectively, is that there are plenty of resources. Mm-hmm. So the causes of scarcity are not necessarily going to be ratified by what economic system you choose, you know, because if there's exploitation going on, is there? And there's nobody out there, I don't care who you are, that can say that exploitation is not out there. The very nature of competitiveness is to try to exploit the weakness of your opponent in order for you to get ahead. You know, competition can be a healthy thing to spur people on to do good things, but the bottom line is scarcity is born out of an unequal distribution of resources. Does that mean all resources have to be distributed equally? No, we're talking about basic needs here. And we can do that. We have the technology to do that. And when we think back about the history of even technologies were developed to increase leisure time, and essentially enhance the quality of living.
Yes.
You know? And the truth is, you can have somebody sitting in the middle of New York City right now who has a less quality of living than somebody sitting in a forest somewhere who does have more leisure time and is nourished and that sort of thing. The problem is we will never find that balance until we start asking the right questions, instead of pigeonholing everything into capitalism versus socialism, communism, and all that kind of stuff. You know, it's time for us to like break out of that and be like, and realize there's no going back. There is no going back. Things are going to get progressively worse, or we're going to have a breakthrough.
Yep.
You know, and nothing's predetermined.
Maybe both.
Well, sure, cyclically things will do that. I just believe at this point in human history, the fundamental shift in consciousness has to transcend our previous categories of of how we have social cohesion. What are the things that we can gather around? And do we lose our diversity for the sake of conformity cohesion? Or can we maintain our diversity with understanding that we all have basic things? It's a fundamental basic respect of our humanity at the bottom line. And so that can't be there, though, without this focus on collective happiness. I think we're trying to work out some themes here, when we talk about the phenomenology of people's experience. Well, okay, so what brings happiness? Well, then we can do that. This is the question we're asking. And we don't have all the answers to it, but we're asking this question. We want our listeners to ask this question too. It's like, let's start focusing on some of the collective things where everybody wins without dismissing the things that are causing enmity between people groups and disparities in resources and things like that. So it's a higher level conversation, but the truth is we've got to have that higher level conversation or we're done as a species.
I think that if we can take a step back and realize that peace is possible, peace is the absence of, for me, is the absence of, if we can intentionally not do things that we know harm one another, if we can start there, then we can start to think more clearly about progressing forward. And I think that we need to get those out of power, those who are in the seat of power, that foster or endorse one person's pleasure at the expense of another's. Got to get those people out of office so we can at least agree upon peace. We can agree upon peace, then we can think clearly about where we're moving next. Or we're doomed, like you said. Very simple. The overarching theme throughout humanity, how can we coexist in our diversity and be happy without making our happiness the displeasure of someone else? That makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. So I think it's time for us to give homework.
Yeah.
So the homework assignment I have in mind is, what is something that you can put to death in order for you to make that next move towards your own pleasure? What is something that has a hold on you that has harmed you and that sort of thing? And I'm not asking you to forget it. I'm asking you to put it to death. Mm-hmm. Don't go kill nobody now. But let that thing die. Just like what I was talking about, with my father, for example. The moment I was able to put to death the notion that I needed his apology for me to be able to walk in my own divinity, my own purpose and path, and certainly would never allow him to step in front of me and stop me from doing anything. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, and then in the end, I found that wasn't even necessary. I didn't need to. And the reconciliation was there. And thankfully that reconciliation in my life came at that time. Did it heal all wounds? Of course not. I don't believe in that. So we carry with us all of the things that make us who we are. So the homework I have for you guys this week is, what is something that you can let go of, not forget, not minimize the pain and suffering, and especially if it's ongoing. I'm not asking anyone to endure anymore, but let go of what that is determining what you will do. For example, if you are in an abusive relationship, I'm not asking you to put to death the idea that it's going to stop. No, I would let go of it so that you can get up and walk out of it. That's your homework for this week. Jason, it's always good. It's always profound with you. We're going to keep this going.
Yep. Good talking to you.
All right. So you guys have a great week. We will see you next time.
Be good to yourself.
Yes, indeed.
If you enjoyed today's broadcast, please head over to avipenhollow.com and also consider being a sponsor on our Patreon page.